The year is 1752, and the British Royal Navy ship HMS Dolphin has just returned to port. However, it is in a sorry state. A sixth-rate frigate, she had set sail 2 years prior as part of an expedition to find the southern land that must exist to balance out the northern hemisphere. But now she is held together with little more than hope and pitch. During the journey, they ran out of iron nails and were forced to improvise. This is the story of what happened when the British exchanged nails for favors from Tahitian women. Our story begins not with the ill-fated voyage of the HMS Dolphin, but actually a few years earlier. In 1750, Great Britain was still smarting from a humiliating defeat suffered at the hands of the French. We are, of course, talking about the 7 Years' War being fought across the globe between France and Britain. The war had been raging for 5 years already, with both sides suffering a number of defeats. But it was at this point still too close to call. In an effort to gain an advantage over their foe, the British Admiralty decided to send a pair of ships on a mission to find the southern landmass that was rumored to exist in the unexplored southern oceans. Their goal was to find this land in order to establish a penal colony there. They believed that such a colony would be a useful addition to their empire. That's because while Britain at the time was certainly a naval powerhouse, the country lacked any real trading posts or outposts in the South Pacific, and so the idea of creating a settlement on a new landmass, which could then be used as a base for trade and naval operations, was a very attractive one. To lead this dangerous mission, the Admiralty chose Captain William Palin, an experienced sailor who had seen action in many of the conflicts between Britain and France. He was given command of the HMS Dolphin, a 14-gun sixth-rate frigate, and ordered to set sail as soon as possible. The Admiralty hoped that if the voyage was successful, the newly discovered land would become a valuable asset in their ongoing war with France. And so in June of 1750, the HMS Dolphin set sail from Spithead, off the Isle of Wight. She was accompanied by the HMS Swallow, a 10-gun schooner, captained by John Campbell. Together, they sailed south, eager to uncover the secrets of the unexplored ocean. As they set sail, the people of Great Britain were in the midst of one of the most exciting periods in their history. That's because while the world at the time was largely unknown, there was a lot of theorizing going on. Many scientists believed that the Earth was a sphere, but there was still a lot that they didn't know about our planet. For example, they knew that there was land in the Arctic Circle, but they weren't sure if there was equivalent land in the southern hemisphere. They also knew that the Atlantic Ocean was vast, but they didn't know how far south it stretched. And so when Captain Palin and his crew set sail for the unknown, they were greeted with much fanfare. For the people of Great Britain, the voyage of the HMS Dolphin and her consort were the first steps in uncovering the secrets of the world. But as the sailors set sail for the unknown, they had no idea of the dangers that lay ahead. What followed was an ordeal that tested the limits of human endurance. As the weeks turned into months, the HMS Dolphin and her consort battled heavy winds and rough seas. But through it all, they pressed on, determined to reach their destination. Eventually, they rounded the tip of South America and entered the Pacific Ocean. After 3 months of difficult sailing, the HMS Dolphin had finally reached the Pacific Ocean, but their troubles were far from over. The crew soon realized that they were in uncharted waters, and they needed to find a way to navigate the treacherous terrain. Fortunately, they had brought along a team of skilled cartographers who were able to map the area and create the first accurate charts of the region. These charts would later help other sailors navigate the treacherous waters around the tip of South America. But sadly, despite their best efforts, the HMS Dolphin never did find the southern landmass that they were seeking. Eventually, the ships were forced to turn back and return to England. By this point, the crews were exhausted and demoralized. They had braved the worst of the seas and endured months of hardship only to come up empty-handed. But as the ships approached England, the crew's spirits began to lift. After 2 years of hardship, they were finally returning home. And so it was that the HMS Dolphin limped into port in the summer of 1752. The sailors were met with cheers from the crowd that had gathered to welcome them back. After 2 years away, they were finally home. However, the celebrations were short-lived. When the ship's cargo was unloaded, it became clear that they had barely survived the voyage. The HMS Dolphin was in a sorry state, and the crew was in desperate need of supplies. They had set sail with high hopes of finding a new land, but they had come back with nothing but disappointment. And so it was that the sailors of the HMS Dolphin were forced to face the reality of their situation. They had braved the worst of the seas and endured months of hardship only to come up empty-handed. They had set sail with dreams of glory and adventure, but they had returned with nothing but disappointment. As the men of the HMS Dolphin sat down to a meager meal, they knew that they had to do something drastic if they wanted to survive. With their supplies dwindling, they needed to find a way to get more food and water. And so it was that Captain Wallace made the decision to seek out the local population in an effort to trade for fresh provisions. He knew that the people of Tahiti were known for their hospitality, and he hoped that they would be willing to help out the stranded sailors. So with a small group of men, he set out to make contact with the locals. But as the sailors approached the shore, they were met with a sight that they had not expected. The Tahitian women were unlike any that the sailors had ever seen before. They were beautiful and exotic, and the sailors were immediately enamored with them. But the sailors soon realized that the women were not interested in helping them. Instead, they wanted something from the sailors in return for their help. And so it was that the sailors of the HMS Dolphin were forced to strike a bargain with the Tahitian women. In exchange for food and water, they would provide the women with nails. The sailors had plenty of nails on board, and so it was an easy trade for them. But for the Tahitian women, the nails were a valuable commodity. They used the nails to make tools and jewelry, and so they were more than happy to help the sailors in exchange for them. And so it was that the sailors of the HMS Dolphin were saved from starvation. But the story doesn't end there. You see, the sailors soon realized that the Tahitian women were taking advantage of them. The women were giving them just enough food and water to keep them alive, but they were charging exorbitant prices for it. The sailors were desperate, and so they had no choice but to comply. But as the days went by, they grew angrier and angrier at being taken advantage of. Finally, they had had enough. One day, the sailors refused to give the women any more nails in exchange for food. The women were furious, but there was nothing they could do. The sailors had found a way to get food and water without them. The sailors of the HMS Dolphin may have lost the battle of wits with the Tahitian women, but they won the war. By refusing to give in to the women's demands, they were able to force them to negotiate a better deal. The Tahitian women were not used to being outsmarted, and so they were eager to make a deal. The sailors agreed to give the women half of their nails in exchange for food and water, and the women agreed to give them twice as much food and water in return. This went on for a while until eventually the sailors had given away all of their nails. Once they had no more nails to trade, the Tahitian women were forced to give the sailors 4 times as much food and water in return for nothing. Eventually, the women gave up and simply gave the sailors everything they needed in exchange for nothing. And so it was that the sailors of the HMS Dolphin were able to survive on the island until they were rescued. In the end, the sailors of the HMS Dolphin were rescued by another ship. When they returned to England, they were hailed as heroes. Despite the fact that they had not found the southern landmass that they were seeking, they had survived, and that was all that mattered. The story of the HMS Dolphin is a reminder that even in the darkest of times, hope can still prevail. The sailors of the HMS Dolphin faced unimaginable challenges, but they never gave up. And in the end, their courage and determination paid off. Though the HMS Dolphin never did find the southern land that they were seeking, they did make some important discoveries along the way. Thanks to the navigational charts created by their cartographers, the seas around the tip of South America were finally charted, and this helped to make the area safer for sailors. The HMS Dolphin may not have found the southern land that they were seeking, but they did make some important contributions to the world of exploration. And so while the voyage of the HMS Dolphin may not have been the success that they were hoping for, it was still an important one. What do you think? Were the nails worth the favors? Let me know in the comments below. And remember to subscribe for more stories like these.